All right, ready to dive in? Today's deep dive is taking us straight to Kenya, October 23rd, 2024 to be exact.
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of news sources for this one. You know, the usual suspects, Kenyans.co.kk, Nairobi Wire.
Even Gafla, Kenya for a little extra flavor.
Oh, and a dash of Business Daily Africa. Got to keep things balanced.
So we're talking politics, courts, the economy, even some good news sprinkled in there.
If you want to know what it was like to be in Kenya on this particular day, well, you've come to the right place.
Let's kick things off with the political scene, shall we? Things are, let's just say, a little spicy over there. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua's impeachment is still making headlines. Kenyans.co.kk says his lawyers are gearing up for an appeal.
This whole thing has been dragging on, hasn't it? Ever since Kithure Kindiki stepped in as his successor. It really raises questions about, well, the stability of Kenyan politics, you know?
And it gets even wilder. Taifa Leo is reporting that Gachagua is claiming there have been attempts to poison him.
Wow, that's a serious accusation.
He's even going so far as to say that President Ruto is targeting him and his family.
Things are getting really tense. Remember when Gachagua's staff got locked out of his office? Taifa Leo covered that too. Felt like a real power move.
Definitely sent a message. But wait, there's more political drama brewing. Senator Kithure Kindiki is proposing we shake things up. He wants 4-year term limits for all elected positions.
Big change. Capital FM pointed out that this directly clashes with Senator Chiragi's bill to extend term limits. It's like a tug of war over, well, over how long these guys get to stay in charge.
And as if this wasn't messy enough, Nairobi Wire throws another grenade into the mix. Allegations of bribery surrounding that impeachment vote, specifically mentioning Senator Mithika Linturi.
So many players in this game. It's what makes Kenyan politics so captivating, you know. Always keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Absolutely. Speaking of edge of your seat stuff, let's switch gears for a bit and talk about the justice system. Capital FM has a pretty disturbing story about Wajir MCA Yusuf Ahmed. He was abducted about a month ago, and now they found his body in a lake.
Tragic. The Law Society of Kenya is calling for a full investigation, and rightfully so. This raises some serious concerns about safety and security, especially for people in public office.
It's a stark reminder of the risks that come with the territory, sadly. And that's not the only tough story coming out of the courts. Taifa Leo is reporting on a case where 3 women are accused of assaulting another woman. The details are, well, let's just say they're pretty brutal, apparently motivated by jealousy.
Makes you realize that behind all the political drama and economic headlines, there are real people dealing with real problems.
Definitely puts things in perspective. Taifa Leo also covered a high-profile divorce. A former international athlete, no less. She was granted a divorce after 15 years of marriage. Her reasons: abandonment, cruelty, and infidelity.
Wow. Even those who seemingly have it all, the fame, success, it doesn't make them immune to personal challenges.
Now, let's dive into the economic landscape. Kenyans.co.key is reporting that the IMF has some pretty gloomy predictions for Kenya's economic future. They've lowered their GDP growth forecast. And get this, they're predicting Angola's economy might actually overtake Kenya's soon.
That's a big deal. Business Daily Africa touched on this as well. Feels like Kenya is at a crossroads, economically speaking.
And to add to that, Nairobi Wire is reporting a surge in loan defaulters. We're talking 7.74 million borrowers struggling to repay their loans. It makes you wonder if it's connected to those IMF predictions.
It's certainly something to consider. Is this a bump in the road, or are we looking at a potential crisis?
And speaking of money, remember those reports about Kenyan banks making massive profits off of government securities? Business Daily Africa put the figure at 110.39 billion shillings. It's a hefty sum.
It makes you think about the distribution of wealth. So you've got these banks raking it in while millions are struggling to make ends meet.
But hey, there is a silver lining. Safaricom is celebrating its 24th anniversary, and they're doing something pretty cool to give back. They're going to refund all M-Pesa users.
That's huge. So many people depend on M-Pesa for their daily transactions. A little boost can go a long way.
All right, let's shift gears again. Education time. Taifa Leo has a rather bizarre story about the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. They goofed up big time. Seems they accidentally sent French textbooks to schools that don't even teach French.
You're kidding. How does that even happen?
I know, right? They even sent them to schools for the deaf and blind. It makes you question, well, the whole decision-making process within the education system.
Especially when you consider the other challenges they're facing. Kenyans.co.kk and Capital FM both highlighted a critical shortage of science teachers. And yet there are tons of unemployed arts graduates.
It's a mismatch that needs addressing. Now, Typhoolio also had a story that really resonated with me. It's about the immense stress men in Kenya are facing. They used the anonymized examples of Chris and George to illustrate this. Chris was terrified to even talk to his wife about his work stress, didn't want to burden her.
It's so common, unfortunately. Men are often expected to just bottle it up.
Exactly. And George, who's a bank manager, he copes by, well, by traditional dancing and singing. It highlights how important it is to create spaces where men feel comfortable opening up about their mental health.
Couldn't agree more. We need to break down the stigmas.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on, we have to talk about a tragic incident that Typhoolio reported on. A child died after falling into a trench on a farm linked to President Ruto.
Oh, that's awful.
What's even more concerning is that residents had previously flagged this trench as a safety hazard. Seems like their warnings were ignored. It really raises questions about accountability and responsibility, especially when those in power are involved.
A tragic reminder that safety should never be taken lightly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to unpack. Stick with us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore even more stories from this eventful day in Kenya.
We'll be right back, so don't go anywhere.
We're back, ready to dig deeper into that Kenyan news cycle. October 23rd, 2024. Remember that political drama we were just talking about? Well, it seems like the plot's thickened.
You mean Rigathi Gachagua, the impeached deputy president? His legal team just hit another snag.
Yep, that's the one. Typhoolio is saying a 3-judge bench ruled against Gachagua's attempt to, well, basically challenge the Deputy Chief Justice's involvement in his case.
They pretty much said she was totally within her rights to put together the bench that's hearing his appeal.
And not only that, the court also made him pay for the legal fees for that challenge. Talk about adding insult to injury.
It's like they said no, and you're paying for the privilege of being told no.
Ouch. And speaking of challenges, remember Senator Karungo Thangwa and his big idea for 4-year term limits?
Oh yeah, that was a bold move.
Capital FM has been covering the public's reaction, and it's pretty split down the middle. Some people think it's a good thing. You know, more accountability, especially with everything going on with Gachagua.
But others are worried about things getting, well, unstable if terms are that short. It's definitely a good debate to have, especially when you compare it to what Senator Chirargai wants, which is to make those terms even longer, 7 years.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you balance fresh perspectives with the need for experience? But let's step away from politics for a moment, shall we? There's this story that really exposes some of the cracks in Kenya's education system.
You're talking about the French textbook thing?
That's the one. It's mind-boggling. Schools for the deaf and blind got these textbooks. What were they thinking?
Yeah, Typhoolio really went in on that one.
It feels like such a waste,
Yeah.
especially when you think about the shortage of science teachers. Both Kenyans.co.kk and Capital FM have been reporting on that.
They've got their priorities mixed up, that's for sure.
Now, remember that article about stress, the one about men in Kenya? I keep thinking about Chris and George.
Oh yeah, the examples from Typhoolio.
Chris was so worried about burdening his wife with his work stress. And George, the bank manager, he deals with the pressure by dancing and singing. It just shows how important it is for guys to have a way to let it all out, you know.
A safe space where they don't have to pretend everything's okay.
That's it. And this ties into another story that really got to me. The one about the child who died after falling into a trench on a farm owned by President Ruto.
Tragic.
What's worse is that people had already warned about that trench, said it wasn't safe. Typhoolio reported that. Seems like nobody listened.
It makes you wonder who's really responsible.
Right, especially when it's someone so powerful. Now, on a slightly lighter note, remember that former athlete who got divorced?
The one from Typhoolio. Yeah, I remember.
It's sad, but it also highlights something that doesn't get talked about enough. Domestic violence.
Absolutely. It happens everywhere, but it's often hidden.
And speaking of things that don't get enough attention, let's talk about Kenyan music. Ghafla. Kenya had this piece about Wadaglas, the rap duo. They're getting some serious backlash after their performance at the Mashuja Day celebrations.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Some fans thought it was too political.
It's interesting, isn't it, how politics and art are always kind of intertwined.
Especially in a place like Kenya, where things are already pretty heated.
And Ghafla. Kenya also had this other story about an artist from Eldoret. He's suing the Kenya Films Classification Board, the KFCB as they call it.
Why is that?
Well, it's over his song. He says they're messing with his freedom of expression.
That's a big accusation.
It is, but it raises some important questions.
Yeah.
about censorship, artistic freedom. It's not just a Kenyan issue. It's happening everywhere.
Artists pushing the boundaries, challenging the system.
Exactly. And it makes you think about all these themes, right?
Yeah.
Power, control, who gets to say what. It's happening in politics, in the justice system, even in the arts.
It's all connected, in a way.
We're back, and for this final part, we're going to dive into, well, the nitty-gritty of the economy.
Numbers time, huh?
You got it. We can't ignore those eye-popping figures from Business Daily Africa. Kenyan banks are making a killing off of government securities.
110.39 billion shillings, if I remember correctly.
That's right. It's a staggering sum. But it creates this weird contrast with, well, with the whole loan defaulters situation.
Yeah, Nairobi Wire had that report about 7.74 million borrowers struggling to repay their loans. On one hand, you've got banks raking it in, and on the other, you've got
A lot of people struggling to just get by. It really highlights the economic disparities in Kenya.
no doubt about it. And then Kenyans.Kakao.ke throws another curveball. The IMF has, they've downgraded their GDP growth forecast for Kenya down to just 5%.
That's a pretty big hit. They're blaming it on, let me see, a credit crunch and a general slowdown across various sectors. That makes those bank profits seem even more jarring, you know.
It's like two different worlds. But Business Daily Africa did offer an interesting comparison. They pointed out that Angola's economy is actually on track to surpass Kenya's, thanks in large part to their oil sector.
So while Kenya is facing these economic headwinds, other African nations are seeing growth. It's a reminder that things can change quickly, and it's not always easy to predict what's coming next.
That's for sure. Speaking of unpredictable, let's loop back to the political arena for a second. Remember how Gachagua's staff got locked out of their offices?
Oh yeah, the Harambee House Annex. What happened there?
Well, Capital FM has an update. President Ruto is taking things to the High Court. He's asking them to basically throw out all the lawsuits that are challenging Gachagua's removal.
So he's going all in on Kindiki.
Mm-hmm.
But something tells me Gachagua won't back down so easily.
You're right. His team is arguing the whole process was, unconstitutional. This fight is far from over.
It's like a political soap opera, and we're all hooked. Now, let's end on a more hopeful note. Capital FM also had this story about the floods in Kilifi County. They hit Tanzanani Primary School pretty hard.
Oh, that's terrible.
No classrooms, no supplies. It really disrupted the kids' education. But what's inspiring is how the community responded.
What did they do?
They rallied together with help from UNICEF and funding from, let me get the names right, the Education Cannot Wait and Postcode Education Trust. They managed to rebuild the school and get the kids back on track.
That's amazing. The power of community, right?
Exactly. It shows that even in the face of real hardship, there's always a way forward. So we've journeyed through a whole day in Kenya, October 23rd, 2024. From the political turmoil to the economic anxieties, the personal struggles, and the glimmers of hope, it's been quite a ride.
Kenya is a country of contradictions, that's for sure.
But it's also a country full of resilience and potential. As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with something to think about. What does the future hold for Kenya? After everything we've learned today, the challenges, the triumphs, where do you think this nation is headed?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon to explore another corner of the world, and we hope you'll dive in with us again.